Hello and welcome to Social Work Shorts Bitesize number 6. This time we're going to talk about critical thinking. Think about a few things connected with that and maybe touch on a bit of strengths-based practice somewhere in the midst of that. There's an understandable desire when you commence practice to be focused on how rather than why, and I think there's a understandable drive to be focused on that as you practice more. How do we do this thing? How do we fill this form in? How do we book rooms? How do we prepare a court report? How do we do a mental capacity act report? Rather than focus on why do we do this job? It's understandable. I completely get it. Newly qualified social workers need to know how they do the job. It's inevitable as you are transforming your theoretical knowledge of skills and methods and models into the real world. But with all jobs, I'm always taken when I think about this thing to the why of things. And Simon Sinek, who writes about kind of organizational culture and such things, talks about this important kind of concept of why, and proposes a concept he calls the golden circle. There's 3 circles embedded in each other. We love a model like that, don't we? The outer circle is what is it you do? Then comes how do you do it? And then right at the heart of it, the concentric circles, is why. And he would suggest we need to understand our why and build out from there to the whats and hows. I mean, for some, social work is a kind of calling, I suppose. It's one of those person-facing calling professions. They felt they've got something to offer, so they must have a why somewhere in them. You know, to help people, support people, work alongside people. Calling is really interesting. It brings out an enthusiasm and a motivation and an internal energy, I suppose, that drives people, doesn't it? We're driven by these inner motivators. When we're driven by what and how, those are external motivators, and we tend to be less motivated in a healthy way. So we absolutely need to know kind of what and how we're doing, but we also need to keep returning to our why. So that's important. And university, as a lecturer from a university, I feel it's important to say this. Your qualification prepares you, in the most part, for the why. Your practice placements will do a bit around how and a bit around what, but they'll do hows and whats of where you are on placement, and you might not get a job where you're on placement. And obviously, those things become further into your past as you get further into practice. So it's imperative we keep returning to why, I think. And why am I talking about this? Well, because I think it roots us in terms of our critical thinking, and I'll come to that, because critical thinking, I'd argue, isn't just about facts. It's not just about the tangible things sometimes. Critical thinking is about peeling back the layers. I do this exercise often with students where I look at the frog pond, which is a picture by Renoir. The frog pond, if I remember rightly, is a place outside of Paris where the elite used to go and kind of spend some time. And I asked them to look at the painting and say what they see. And it's an impressionist painting. So because of that, it just creates an impression. You don't really know what's going on. And people will spot little things in that. They'll kind of, there's a group of people in the middle, so they'll say, well, there's a group of people gathered and there were some boats and that kind of thing. And so they'll tell me that. And then I go, right, okay, let's peel back some more layers. Keep looking. Look again. And see what you see. And then people go, it looks like some people maybe swimming in the water. The boats are different colours, or there's something going on further in the distance. What's that? What's this thing hanging from this, what looks like a boat, a bigger boat, or maybe, And then I'll say, right, that's really good. So we've looked again. We've peeled back another layer in our thinking, and we've found other things. And then I would say, right, now hypothesize about what's going on. And it's debatable what's going And they hypothesize, they go, well, it could be, clearly the people are dressed nicely. They could be at a wedding. And I'm going, well, yeah, they could be, but there are people swimming in the lake. Is that what's going on, Is it just a Sunday afternoon soiree or something like that? So critical thinking is about peeling back the layers, isn't it? It's about looking once, looking twice, looking again, hypothesizing, bringing in other kind of ideas, piecing things together, engaging in that professional curiosity thing that people talk about a lot at the minute. Although I think professional curiosity is just a part of good practice, really. Professional curiosity, thinking outside the box, maybe thinking beyond the obvious and the apparent, trying to get underneath things, analysing. That's critical thinking, isn't it? The objective analysis of the tangible information. And here's where we start to stack things up. The other person's subjective view to arrive at a reasoned judgment. And critical thinking moves us beyond process, I think. It moves us beyond, I see problem X, so I do Y. It leads us, I think, to defensible decision making, because we've unpicked the layers. I can show you how I worked it out. I can show you how I got to this position. And Shepherd et al., Shepherd and colleagues, in 2008 in the British Journal of Social Work article, suggested that there are two aspects to practice that I think reflect the how and the why. The heart, they said, the emotional, interpersonal, and the head, the reasoning and the intellectual, are really important. And social work, they say, has always been about heart and head, the emotional, the empathetic, the practical, the pragmatic. All of these things have their place. The two aspects, and it has to be both, underlie all social work practice. And they're apparent in the social work literature, apparent in social work education, as we focus on kind of both the intellectual critical thinking and the interpersonal relationship stuff, the skills that we'll use. So critical thinking is essential because it promotes better quality decision making, more effective interventions in the practice dimension. And social work's decision making has to combine this heart and head thing. And if we're going to achieve this, we need to be reflective practitioners, looking back at our practice, but also forward looking, exploring what we need to do next, and maybe what we do differently for individuals that we're working with, or for our practice in general as we work with other people. So critical thinking and critical reflection, kind of two things are interchangeable a bit, aren't they, I suppose? Marry together this how and this why, bringing together the head and the heart. And critical thinking asks us to consider a few things. Am I doing things right? I suppose that's how, isn't it? Am I doing the right things? So you might be doing the thing right, but it might not be the right thing for that individual, for that moment of practice. And how can I be sure what the right things are for myself? So that's critical thinking, isn't it? Practice, process, knowledge. That's kind of saying, well, this is what I'm told to do in university, in the place I practice. Is that the right thing for this people? I'll tell you a story. I remember my first few weeks, months in practice thinking, somebody will tell me how to do this eventually. Somebody will tell me, use this method, go out and do it. And they don't. You have your tool bag of social work skills and methods and models and that kind of thing. And you have to be able to do those right. But then figure out whether you're doing the right things. That could be reflection in the moment, couldn't it? Or reflection afterwards. And then how can I be sure what the right things are? Reflection again. Reflecting before action ahead. Yeah. So that kind of brings us to this idea that critical thinking is disciplined thinking. And I really like, you might have seen this video, Tim Minchin, the piano playing comedian. He's given I don't know whether he's receiving an honorary doctorate or something. I think he is, at the university he went to as a young man. And He gives us 9 life lessons. And one of the ones that really resonates with me in relation to this is be hard on your opinions. And I think that's critical thinking. Being hard on your opinions. You know, we have to be so cautious, don't we, about the bias that we carry ourselves, the bias that we carry inside of us around things, particularly when we're busy, particularly when we're rushed, particularly when we don't feel as though we've got time to contemplate these things. We have to be hard on our opinions. An author called Jonathan Roach, he says, slow down and think critically. Slow down. You've got to slow down in order to think critically. You can't do it on the fly. You know, yes, we can reflect in action, but we can't think critically on the fly. And he goes on to say the skills of critical thinking allow for the best quality decisions or actions for the situations in front of us. And critical thinking, he says, is a vehicle through which the outcome or the decision gets constructed. So actually, in a way, we need to kind of critically think with the individual that we're involved with in terms of our practice, don't we? So it's not necessarily just, although I think we have to do some of this, it's not necessarily something that just happens at a distance. It's not necessarily something that happens remotely from the individual, although it might, you know, some of it might, but we have to think critically maybe with the individual. Maybe we have to get at their why. So critical thinking has to be proactive, not reactive. Got to set time aside to engage in it rather than it being rather than us practicing from a simple knee-jerk reaction. Usually possibly as a consequence of things having gone wrong, I suppose. We need to analyse our practice, however well or otherwise it went. Or how will we ever know what that right looks like? How do we know that that right is this right for this situation? So we consider practice ideas. How are we doing it? Practice objectives. What are we trying to do through this reasoned thinking and research knowledge, maybe rooted in why we do what we do. So it does involve what happened by looking back at it, exploring what happened, reflection on action. Essential is evaluating the success of the intervention from the point of view of all of those involved. I think, you know, this idea of 360 degree kind of exploration is really important here. To evaluate the kind of work, you know, so, and it might involve, therefore, after that evaluation, evaluating other forms of action, forming plans. And it might be that we evaluate things and consider future interventions, future ways of practice, not just the practice that we've engaged in and reflected on with this individual. And serious case reviews talk about this lack of movement from description to analysis in social work reports. So I think it's an important thing that we must engage in. And one of the problems is, in practice, I suppose, is that we're always working with a degree of uncertainty. Uncertainty of what the outcome of a change might be. Systems theory tells us that you pull one string in a system, you can end up unraveling strings in that system or in a range of other systems, for better or worse. You know, how do you choose between two alternatives? How do we choose when there's some degree of uncertainty or chance involved? Maybe, you know, that's a real factor, isn't it? Never mind the uncertainty in situations, the chances of things happening in a particular way. You know, we might be the decision maker, I suppose, in terms of a Mental Capacity Act best interest assessment, I suppose, or we might be supporting the person to make the decision. And I'd argue, thinking about this why thing, thinking about Simon Sinek's golden circle, I'd argue it depends on a full understanding of the person's goals. What do they want to achieve? How might these things be best achieved for them, by them? What is their why? And the relationship of goals to decisions is mediated through a concept called utility. Expected utility is a kind of an idea that what's important, we have to get at what's important and valuable to the person. What are they expecting out of this action in terms of what's important and valuable to them. So it's a measure of subjective desirability, I suppose, of an outcome or event corresponding to that individual's preferences for it. And I just wonder, when I think about that, are we sometimes trying to get people to achieve goals that they don't desire? And how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we ever do that? You know, if someone doesn't want to achieve a particular thing, it looks as though they're failing all the time, doesn't it? When actually we're failing to identify something from their subjective position. So utility is a subjective concept. It's about their truth, you know, talked about that before, their understanding, their evaluation of a particular outcome. And that might be quite different to yours, quite different to a range of other people. So it has to do with the person's preference. And that preference, that idea of preference, has to be closely tied to goals. If I prefer to do something, then that's probably going to be something that's important to me, or it's going to help me move towards a goal that's important to me, something that satisfies me in some way, I suppose. And these things are difficult to tie down, aren't they? I think if you try to think of your why, you'll find it difficult to kind of do. How do we do that? How do we tie down somebody else's whys? Well, I suppose that's building rapport, isn't it? Building rapport, getting to know the person on their terms, at their pace, on their clock, not your clock. So, thinking critically in practice about someone's world relies on us understanding their goals, their values, their heart. You need to get at their why. So when to do it? Critical thinking, you know, I've already kind of alluded to this. Critical thinking or reflection should permeate through all of the practice moments. We need to engage in it before action. This sits outside of the practice moment, helps us explore potential opportunities or problems that might arise. It doesn't have to prejudice what might happen. It doesn't mean that we just go through the motions of what we've kind of thought through, but it means we've considered scenarios, considered things that might go wrong, considered where we might want to take conversations if they arise. So, and then reflection sits in the practice moment, doesn't it? We may well have reflected beforehand on our actions that we're about to take, and then none of those things might occur, so we have to adjust as we go. Being self-aware, I suppose, of the impact on who we are, that reflexivity. What's the impact of me? I don't know, my gender, my ethnicity, my experience or lack of it, of practice, my own personal life experiences, my own values. The list goes on. How are those things affecting this practice moment? You know, they're all those things are in play, aren't they, when we're in practice? And then critical thinking and reflection used to take place during action as well, but after action, and take us beyond action. And in some ways that can and should to some extent sit outside of the practice moment, a practice of a direct nature. And in the practice moment of our decision making and considerations, so when we're thinking about it outside of the practice moment, we need to contemplate from a solid rationale, but also weave in that heart stuff that's really important. And how do we do this? Well, there are many ways to do it, to engage in this critical thinking thing. The key is to make sure you do it. Write it down. Keep a journal or a notebook, critical thinking journal or notebook to write your thoughts down. You'll have a notebook to write your notes, I suppose. I have another one where you kind of think it through. Carol Lomas, who's an American journalist, says she's never sure what she thinks until she writes it down. Writing down is not a record, she says, of our thoughts. It is our thinking. Or as an alternative, you talk out loud, talk to a trusted colleague or maybe a mentor if you've got one, who can maybe offer a critique or a helpful response of your thinking. Find or create in your teams or your workplaces safe and supportive groups, and obviously use supervision. It's another place you can take this. There's evidence that the best form of critical reflection takes place when it's done with somebody else. So I think this is why we need to, and it's worrying that maybe we all work from home a lot now, or a lot more. It's in those conversations, isn't it? The critical reflection conversations where we bounce ideas around where to take things, what to do next. That real critical thinking takes place. You can do it on your own, absolutely fine. But it seems to be that it happens more effectively when we do it with other people. So maybe establish critical thinking and reflection groups, I don't know, something like that. And the process of critical thinking relies on a number of things. Well, it starts with remembering. Don't forget all your law and your policies and your theories and your methods. That's the critical thinking is when you bring all them in. You're probably not going to think of those things. Well, the law you will, but maybe not the theories and methods that are underpinning it. You're not going to maybe think of those things in the practice moment. But think about them afterwards. Think about the research you're aware of. Find out more about the research. It reinforces elements of practice and helps you make sure that you know that not only are you doing the things you do right, but that those things are the right things to be doing, the right ways to approach the right things to say. So the best way to explore critical thinking and reflection is to do it. It's as simple as that, really. And I found this list of 10 attributes of critical thinking, which I think is really good. Intellectual curiosity. Be curious about things. Be curious about why things are the way they are. But intellectual honesty. Know when you've run out of your understanding, when your understanding's run out, and go and talk to other people. While critical thinking relies on the subjective position of the other person, we have to work from an objective position. We have to take into account the emotional content. We're back to Aristotle and his modes of persuasion here, aren't we? We have to take into account the subjective emotional content as well, but we have to start from a position of objectivity. We need to be open-minded. We need to be flexible in our thinking, and we need to persist in our endeavours to be curious, to be intellectually savvy, to make sure we keep reading around things, find out the latest stuff. And then once we've done our critical thinking, we need to be decisive, I suppose. Make that decision. Understanding the cause and effect relationship between things. So there you go. Start with why, Simon Sinek would say. Great book if you want to grab that. Start with why, you would say, and work out from there.